after we left Las Vegas, we had to get on a long train ride all the way to Kentucky. So we moved from Tennessee to Oklahoma to Virginia to Maine to Nevada to Kentucky. Now, for my viewers who are not living in the United States, that's basically a gigantic circle across more or less every area of the United States. You've got the South in there. You're kind of passing through the Midwest. You go as far northeast as you can go. You go to the West. I was in all of the different time zones in that time. And the train ride, we got on Amtrak. It was a very long train ride. We passed through a lot of deserts in Utah, in New Mexico. I believe we were in Arizona very briefly, but I don't quite remember. We went all over the place on that train ride, and there were quite a few interesting folks who showed up on the train, because the first time we went on the train, when we were there for about a day, and I was just kind of sleeping a lot of the time and then stumbling my way over to the food compartment when we were allowed to buy food, or during a set like lunch or dinner time, there was a specific dining car that you could go to and you could pay for food. Of course, the tickets themselves were all paid for by my aunt and my father, because we were trying to move back to wherever my father was, which was, again, at this time, Kentucky, the state above Tennessee where we started out. And food, it was weird the way that food worked on the Amtrak train, because you would have to go like to this downstairs area to buy like little snacks and stuff, or you could buy alcohol down there. And other times they would have a specific dining car where there would be a set time where people would be cooking and stuff, and they would bring food out onto the train. And as you were sitting on the train, you had to wait for the people to come out to bring it to you, and you would pay for like the specific things you wanted. But that wasn't always the case. And I don't know if there was a specific schedule where they did that every day, but it didn't seem like it was like that, because they would call people down to go under the little train compartment area into the store where you would buy stuff. But there were some strange people who we saw on a couple of the trains that we had to depart from, because we didn't just stay on the same train the whole time. We had to go into the station and wait for different trains. I remember specifically in St. Louis, Missouri, we had almost forgot our stuff on the train, or at least my mom did, and I had mentioned to her, I think we had more stuff than this. And of course, this was after I had sat desperately trying to get her phone's internet working so I could watch YouTube videos that night. And of course, the internet cut out again and again every so often, because we would go into like a more rural area where the internet simply doesn't work. The entire time we were on the train tracks in New Mexico, it was like that. It was almost unbearable, because the only thing I had to do was just look out the window. Of course, I like the aesthetics of the desert a lot, but I wanted something a little bit more to do than just that, especially because the seats on the train were so crowded together, where like when I was sitting next to my mom, I had to sit. If I was sitting on the inside, it would feel like I was being squished, and if I sat on the outside, it felt like I was too far into the aisle and blocking people. So it was very annoying the way the seats were set up, and it wasn't entirely a comfortable ride. If I was riding on the train by myself, I would have had a great time, because I just love trains. And overall, the experience was nice, but in between not being able to have internet and sort of just getting bored there, and having to depart from trains, and dealing with her just not remembering where bags were, we had to rely on the kindness of the staff of the train to find the bags on the train the multiple times that she had forgotten them. That got a little bit annoying. But when we got off in St. Louis, I remember it being freezing cold, and there was this woman who, I don't know what the politically correct term for this is, but she was like a midget. She was a very tiny black woman, and with her was her sister, who was the polar opposite. She was this gigantic black woman, like, I mean, huge, over 300 pounds, and they were just together, and we had to load all of our stuff onto what was basically like this golf cart. I don't know what any other way to describe this little car that you drove around in the train station in St. Louis was. It was basically just a golf cart. Wait, no, this wasn't St. Louis. They were going to St. Louis. This was a different part of Missouri, or it was close to Missouri. I don't fucking remember which city this was, but I remember the tiny black woman saying, "Are you going to St. Louis?" a bunch of times. And we weren't going to St. Louis, but we had to go to the station there, so we were essentially going in the same direction. But this place had a very industrial vibe. I think it was in Missouri, or at least it was close. Like, the sky was very gray. It like the air smelled like chemicals and stuff. It was incredibly cold. So it had that very industrial, polluted, Midwestern, almost dystopian, authoritarian kind of vibe that a lot of those states have. And like, I remember in a lot of parts of Missouri, various other times that I visited there, the sky would actually be orange, or at least it would look very close to orange, because there was so much smoke in the or so much smoke and smog in the sky. But yeah, these two women kept asking us, "Are you going to St. Louis? Or are you going to Georgia?" Yeah, I want to go to Georgia because it's hotter down there, and once we get to St. Louis, we can depart into Georgia. And she was just sick of it being cold, and we talked a little bit about being in Nevada. She was like, "Oh yeah, the weather in Nevada is amazing." I can't do her voice, but that was sort of a neat experience, seeing the duality between this really tiny woman, like way smaller than my sister would be, you know, and my sister was like 10 years old at this time, like way smaller. She was so fucking small. And then seeing her sister, be this like gigantic black woman who, like, in order to fit her onto the golf cart, we all had to do a bit of work. It was very strange. It was very strange, this scenario. There was this hyper-religious woman who, after we had sort of, or the staff member had drove this golf cart into this, like, compartment storage area where everyone put their bags for safekeeping until the next train came, I had sat down in, again, this very industrial train station next to this hyper-religious woman from California. And she was talking about how everyone is so happy in California all the time, how if you want to move somewhere nice, you move there because it's the only good state in the country. I believe that was a close approximation of the wording she used. That was basically what she said. And I had talked to her about how when we were getting to Las Vegas, we rode the Greyhound, and all of a sudden, her face just lit up. Like, she looked so terrified when I said that, and she said that there was this crazy man on the Greyhound years and years ago who found a little girl and chopped the little girl up, and I don't know if she said that he ate her or not, but basically he said he chopped this little girl up who he was sitting around on the Greyhound with, and she said, oh, maybe he was off his meds or something, I don't know. And but after she said all of this, she said, you must never ride the Greyhound. And she said this as she was shaking her head. She said it in a very, very, like, staunch, serious tone. You must never ride the Greyhound. And I said, oh my god. And then I was saying that just for, like, dramatic effect, so it seemed like I was taking her seriously. Of course I wasn't. It's just silly. But then I apologized. I was like, oh, I shouldn't say, oh my god, that's disrespectful to the Lord. I also lied for some reason about going to church. I said, yeah, I need to find a new church, quote unquote, to go to when I get to this new state. I don't know why I lied about that. I think I was just trying to minimize conflict. That's a big habit of mine, is that when I'm in situations with people in real life, I will try to mirror their beliefs or their interests or like the things that they do in order to end conversations quicker, minimizing as much conflict as I possibly can. Like a lot of the time, and this is something I do nowadays just because it's funny, it simultaneously minimizes conflict and it also kind of offends people as like, oh, that's a bizarre thing to say, where someone will be making a point that I radically disagree with, where normally I would get really angry if I heard something like that, or at least irritated, and they'll make that point, and then I'll go, yeah, whatever you think right now, I reject every single thing I said before, and I completely agree with what you just said, or I'll say like, your stance right now, I don't care what it is, but I agree with it, and then I'll end the conversation. And that kind of offends people when you say that, but I've gotten to the point in my life where I like seeing them get offended when I say that, because they can't quite argue with you because you're saying you agree with them and then just using that as a way to end the conversation. But at the same time, it seems kind of condescending because you're kind of implying that you think they're stupid, and at the same time, you don't have the time to talk with them, because that's really what it is. It's like, I don't have the time for you, so I'm just gonna act like I agree with you because not talking to you is more important than the principles of what I believe. It's people who have too much time on their hands who are able to get into arguments. And I think that's funny. I like doing kind of dickish things to people like that every now and again these days. But back then I was a lot more timid. So I sort of pretended to be a Christian, and I apologized for saying, oh my God. And then she went to me and was like, oh no, that's totally okay. That's not disrespectful to the Lord. Then I remembered, oh, liberal Californian, this is totally okay. She's probably all right with gay people too. But I didn't press that question. So it's an interesting people, couple interesting folks who I came about, or who we came across, I should say. Eventually we get our luggage out of the train, we have to go on a couple other trains, and then eventually we get to, I think it was St. Louis, Missouri that we got off at, which is weird because I had said that we weren't going to St. Louis. And I had said that like multiple times, even though it said that on our tickets. I just wasn't quite as perceptive to information as I am now, I guess. But yeah, I just kept saying that we weren't. I think it was because my mom kept saying that we weren't. She kept saying we're going to Kentucky, and it's like big thonk. I should have realized, oh wait, it says on our tickets that we were going to St. Louis. But we end up getting off at like a bus station in St. Louis. And my mom basically just calls my father, and he has all of the dogs with him for some reason. I guess it's because he had to go on a really long drive to get here, so he took all the dogs with him. And you've probably heard me tell this story before, but he had taken the dogs out of their cages to take them all on walks. There was 3 dogs in total here. And it was raining outside in St. Louis, and I accidentally had said, because my dad noticed that my mom didn't have her wedding ring on anymore, and because I was trying to be a more honest person, that was one of my like goals that I had for that year, because I didn't want to lie all the time anymore the way that I had used to. And so my goal of being a more honest person, I sat down and said, my mom sold it while we were in the middle of Maine so we could eat food. And he got so distraught and upset when he heard that, because it was his mother's ring, and the pawn shop she sold it to is probably just going to smelt it. He got so upset that he looked around at the dogs, and he was trying to put them up, and left, one of the cages slightly opened, so much so that the little dog, Widget, jumped out. And again, it was pouring in the rain, and it was really dark. I didn't have a proper belt because I couldn't afford a proper belt, because again, when we were in the middle of Virginia, my mom was throwing so many things at me and forcing me to pack up all of her stuff in the middle of this house while like screaming at me at the top of her lungs, just throwing stuff at me. And so I deserted all of my clothes. I deserted all of my possessions that were in this house. And all I had with me were the clothes that were on my back. So I didn't have a proper belt to hold up my pants, and because I was so underweight due to my metabolism and how little food I was eating because we were just that poor, my pants would constantly fall down. And I had deserted all my stuff there, didn't have a proper belt, so by the time this dog got out and was running around in this street that, you know, had quite a few cars coming around the curb through there, he runs out and I'm chasing after him, and the car that ultimately ran him over slowed down when he saw me, slowed down when he saw the dog as well, saw me running around, saw the dog, and then the dog kept running off, and I couldn't quite run as fast as I normally would because my pants just kept falling down because I couldn't afford a proper belt. I had lost all of my clothes when I was there because, again, my mom was going violent and psychotic, forcing me to put all of her stuff into bags, into boxes, forcing me to carry all of her stuff, that I didn't have any of my own stuff to even keep my pants up properly. So I was chasing and chasing after this dog until ultimately the guy who had at one point slowed down, saw the dog, saw me, had sped up when he saw the dog in front of his car. He started kind of slowing down when he looked at it. His lights flashed at it. He saw it, and then he sped up into the dog. And as soon as I saw that guy had an Illinois license plate, I knew that guy was a fucking asshole. It only took me seeing that he ran my dog over to know that he really was from Illinois. Seriously, if you're from Illinois, fucking kill yourself. But unless you're Jack Sharp, that guy's cool. And so, you know, it really fucked me up seeing that because I was standing right there, like I was in very close proximity to the car, and I was so close watching that dog get ran over, this tiny little dog, and I heard him screech multiple times as he was under the tire of that car, and I just couldn't stop crying. I was so angry that when I had saw the car turn into the place that it had turned into, I had picked the dog up on my own, and I remember telling my father that I wanted to kill someone at that time because I was just so upset seeing my dog get hurt like that. I walked over to the car with the dog in my hand, and I just slammed on that guy's window with my fist a bunch of times. If that guy had not sped up as quickly as he did at the place he had stopped, I would have broken his window. I came pretty close to at least putting a big dent in it because I just slammed my fist on it again and again until his car started going, and I took off after his car. I ran really fucking fast. That was the fastest that I had ran in like years, and I just kept slamming my hand, or my fist rather, against the window of that car again and again. I wanted to fucking kill the people in that car. And they ended up getting away. My father gets a picture of the license plate of the car. He calls the police and tells them the license plate. And at this point, the car had brushed its wheel against my foot. I had almost gotten my foot ran over. My foot could have gotten broken. And the police basically didn't take that seriously. They had sided with, of course, the guy who ran over the dog intentionally. And that was that. My dog was dead. I was crying a whole bunch. My mom was distraught. She was crying a whole bunch. And we drove home to Kentucky, to the new house that we would be living at and that I'm living at now.